welcome back to another episode of the Industry Leaders Podcast with myself, Kim Leggett, and Dane McDonald.
Feels like it's been a few weeks.
I know. I was just going to say, like, little to everyone's knowledge, obviously, because if you're listening to this or watching this, you see episode by episode as it comes.
Yeah.
But Dane and I actually pre-recorded a lot of these in a 2-week time frame, and then we have not seen each other in a very long time.
We were doing 3 or 4 a week, and then kind of like this is actually fun. This is chill. This is relaxed, and kind of the standard day to day, right? Like, so it's a good break up to the routine.
It is. But getting to today's episode, we actually have someone who is quite new. I didn't actually know very much about Jackson. So, and you actually put him onto me to contact and get involved in the show. Do you want to explain to us why?
Well, 2 reasons. One, I was actually having just a catch up with Lane Norton. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, I'm like, look, so, I want to get some new people on our podcast. Like, who would you recommend reaching out to? Mm-hmm. And the first name that he said was Jackson. He's like, he's like, there's this Aussie guy, Jackson Peos. He's based over in Western Australia. He's doing some great things in nutrition. He trains, he looks the part. So he's like, for your audience who like blending science with real world examples, he's the perfect candidate. So obviously I, Instagram stalked Jackson, went up to his profile, saw that he was obviously practicing what he preaches, but then also is a very knowledgeable guy. That's the first reason. And the second reason is he's into all his Japanese anime. I know. And all that type of stuff as well. Yeah. I thought that's pretty cool. A lot of the stuff that he was watching, I watched growing up and was a fan of. So I'm like, this guy seems like a cool cat. So let's get him on the show.
Yeah, can't wait. We'll bring him on. All right, welcome, Jackson. So thank you for joining us on the show.
My pleasure to be here.
Perfect. Now, you are almost like a mini or a up and coming Lane Norton, but in Australian version, which I think is really exciting for anyone that's listening to this.
That to Lane, so
and in saying that, your field of expertise is nutrition. So today we're going to actually be talking about how to optimize body composition through nutrition strategies backed by science. Now, from my understanding, you're a PhD researcher and you've completed a bachelor in sports science, and you've got also a bachelor in exercise physiology. You're an accredited sports nutritionist and you work alongside bulk nutrients as well. And you're sort of specialize in body composition and things like that. So in saying that, because of all this research and all this knowledge you have, what really intrigued me is your recent thing that you put on Instagram about 10 minutes ago, which was on diet breaks. Can you please explain what the results are from this? Because it's almost a little bit controversial in what you said.
Yeah, massively controversial.
Correct.
This is hot off the press.
Yes.
So to give some people some context, I actually started looking into diet breaks around 3 years ago, when they were sort of just like this hype term. Like, we didn't really have any research to support them, but they were starting to be used by and athletes. And for those who don't know, a diet break is just an intermittent period of higher calorie intake that's sprinkled somewhere along your weight loss phase. Now,
that was me yesterday.
Planned though, right? Planned.
No, unplanned.
I was trying to let you out there.
That's all right.
So anyway, the theory that a lot of people had speculated was by having these sort of intermittent higher feeding periods that we would be able to, number one, maintain our metabolic rate better, have these like this metabolic boost during dieting, and we'd be able to maintain more of our muscle mass by sort of refilling glycogen and turning off that sort of catabolic stimulus for a little bit of period of time, and that we'd also get this short-term release in this hormone called leptin, which is a hormone responsible for regulating our energy expenditure, how many calories we burn, as well as our appetite. And when leptin levels are higher, we have higher metabolic output, and we'll have better satiety, so we're not as hungry. So the idea was that if we have these extra calories come in, at least for a short period of time, we're going to get a metabolic boosting effect. There's going to be higher circulating levels of leptin in the blood, and this is going to allow sort of lower hunger or easier hunger management. Basically, with all those things leading to better weight loss outcomes by the end of the phase. Now, they were all theories that had a decent theoretical rationale. And I actually published a review paper in 2019, I believe, and Lane was actually a co-author on that paper. And it was a narrative review titled Intermittent Energy Restriction Theoretical Considerations for the Athlete. And we basically did a research review and we looked into all the studies on intermittent dieting. So studies that have used these sort of increased feeding periods during a diet. And we basically came to the conclusion that like there is pretty solid research to suggest that maybe these things are probably going to benefit us or at least benefit athletes. So to where we are now, after that review paper, I conducted what was close to an 18-month data collection at the University of Western Australia, where we had over 60 athletes come into the lab, go through 12 weeks of dieting. And that 12 weeks of dieting was either 12 weeks straight, or they did it with a diet break model, where after every 3 weeks of dieting, they would get a 1 week diet break where food would come up, carbohydrates would come up, and they would just maintain their body weight for the week. Now, I hypothesized with a number of the other co-authors that the guys with the diet breaks were going to have higher metabolic rate, more lean mass retention, and better fat loss efficiency when using these diet breaks at the end of the study.
Yeah.
Now, basically, none of that happened. So when we got to the end of the study and we compared the two groups, the group that was having the diet breaks versus the one that weren't, just slogged it straight for 12 weeks, there was no difference in the fall in metabolic rate. There was no difference in the loss of lean mass. There was no difference in fat loss. And there was actually no difference in circulating levels of leptin in the blood. And I actually went through a massive process to get my phlebotomy credentials so I could basically take blood from the veins and be licensed to do so. It was a massive project because this was really important. And the only way we know how to verify some of these claims that people are making is if I do the blood work. And cost close to 30 grand to do the blood work for these participants. So it's
especially for leptin, because it's not bulk build.
Exactly.
Yeah. When you were saying that, I'm like, it's not I've got some background. I used to run lots of lab tests myself, and that was one that is like be nice to have, but it ain't cheap.
Yeah, totally. But like I just thought we just got to find a way to do it. So we did it. So in a sense, very disappointing, I guess. Depending on how you look at it.
Here's a question on the group that was doing the diet breaks. Was it like a complete break where you weren't giving them any guidelines, or were you saying like, you were going to a 10% above baseline surplus? Like, was there some guidelines for that?
So at the start of the study, we had a very tightly monitored weight maintenance phase. So we would give them initially their predicted maintenance calories, which is not going to be perfect for everyone. What we did, we just monitored their body weight every 3 days, and we just titrated calorie intake up and down until we found where they were truly like at maintenance and their body weight wasn't moving. Like, okay, here's your true maintenance. Based on that, that was before the study even started. So everyone was weight stable going in. Then each time the diet break came along, we would correct for the loss of fat mass and fat-free mass and weight that had happened during this block of dieting. And then we would adjust their new maintenance. So what they would be fed, their new maintenance calories during the diet break. So ideally, it was basically weight stable. And that is verified by our data because it showed that the average weight change during diet break weeks with all the people was like 89 grams. So it was like it's insignificant weight change during the diet breaks. Now, they had maintenance calories, but compared to their dieting weeks, that increase in calories came completely from carbohydrates because, like I said before, we were going through these leptin changes, and there's research to show that leptin is far more sensitive to carbohydrate intake than it is to dietary fat intake. So basically, what I sort of take away from this is that basically diet breaks have probably been overhyped by a lot of people. That's not to say that there were no benefits to diet breaks at all.
I was going to say the one variable that I think it's hard to measure via labs or things like that is the psychological aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, massively. I was just about to get onto that. So what we did see was the group that did have the diet breaks, they had much lower hunger and higher satisfaction during the 12 weeks of dieting.
And probably greater levels of compliance.
Yeah.
And it was. We had 8 people drop out of the continuous dieting group, but only 4 drop out of the diet break. And when we compared adherence to the calorie intake, it was about 88% in a diet break group, but only about 68% in the continuous dieting group. So it looks like people found it harder to stick to the no break protocol. A few more people fell off the wagon. And it seemed like a few more people found it difficult to maintain that calorie level the whole time without having any diet breaks. So at least go ahead.
So it sounds like then, I guess the conclusion on that is like from a physiological standpoint, benefits are much of a much. It's more really only the psychological aspect that could lead to a greater level of adherence.
Correct. There is the physiological perspective from hunger, like we did. So we measured a number of other hormones, and there's a hormone that's responsible for suppressing our appetite called PYY, and we did see higher levels of PYY in the diet break group, which means they're more satiated. So there is physiological changes going on somehow, that have got higher levels of these hormones that are allowing them to feel more satiated. And this is reflected in when we ask them how hungry are you, or to rate it on the scale. That's why they're probably rating those lower hunger and higher satisfaction scores when we measure them. But yes, I think
interesting.
The changes in hunger, they have the flow-on effect to the psychology, which is the big point there.
Yeah.
Like if someone's just fucking super hungry all the time, their psyche is just not going to be hugely positive, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think you've opened up a can of worms. There's something I want to ask you after this, but I think before we do that, I want to actually take it back. Like, how did you get into what you're doing now? You know, like, tell us a little bit about your journey into the fitness industry, how you kind of went down this path into, you know, going into research. Obviously, for anybody that follows you on social, you practice what you preach. You're a beast in the gym. You obviously love lifting iron. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, what you've been doing, and
Yeah, so I had a big athlete childhood. My dad played AFL for the West Coast Eagles and Brisbane Bears. So we had like a pretty big sporting family. And so I was always involved in sport from very early on. And while I was playing sport, I did become quite fascinated in sort of how could I make myself sort of bigger, faster, and stronger. And it was only really for sporting intentions at that time. But I also watched a lot of anime from a very young age, like we're talking the Dragon Ball Z and that ilk. And even before I knew what a dumbbell
did you watch the Western version or the real stuff, mate, with the subtitles?
Well, I was watching Western because I didn't know that Japanese anime was a thing. I just saw cartoons. I was like, these cartoons are sick. But it took me a little bit later on to realize that like there's this sort of specific little branch of like the Japanese animation. But so I was on the Western stuff. But as a kid, I don't even think I had a laptop or a computer, so all I got to watch was free to air TV at that point.
Yeah,
Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon and Naruto, and that's what we got. But yeah, before I knew what a dumbbell was or a lateral raise, I just knew I liked how muscles looked and how those physiques looked in sort of Dragon Ball Z, and I didn't know how you got them. I just sort of like what's Goku, it's just a lot of running around and eating, and like you get huge and shredded. But sort of as time went on, probably into like my middle teens, that's when I started reading a little bit of like nutrition and training information. And I was just like, well, I want to be bigger, faster, and stronger. How do I do that? And
who were some of the first people that you started looking into?
See, it wasn't so much people. Like I don't think I had any like educators back then. I was just doing a hell of a lot of like website searching. I remember there were forums around at the time, and like mum would get me like magazines, like I think it was like Flex and Muscular Development, stuff like that back then. And I didn't have the tools to be able to work out what was fact and what was fiction at that point. I took it all on face value, but I just started consuming information that like I had the interest there, and that interest just continued to build. At around sort of like 18, 19, that's when my weight training started transitioning from a focus from purely like getting better at sport to like getting stronger and like more muscle, to more of like the aesthetic component of things, I guess. And then I finished up at school. It was time for uni. I was always quite a talented academic, so I could do sort of whatever I wanted. And funnily enough, I didn't know what I wanted to do after year 12. So when I applied to university, and you sort of put in your preferences for where you want to go to, my first preference was veterinary science. And the only reason for that was because it was the hardest degree to get into in the state. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. So I was like, I'll just set myself a higher threshold, so then I have a reason to sort of work hard at my studies. And I started veterinary science, and I was still lifting and reading about all the training and nutrition stuff at the time. But when you get to choose some elective units, like units that aren't part of your core sort of study. And of course, I chose one of my electives as a sports science unit. And I found, like, within my first semester, I was putting about 4 times as much effort into this one crappy sports science unit that didn't mean anything to my degree. I was sort of just breezing through my animal biology and veterinary stuff, and I thought, okay, this is probably not right here. So much to my parents' dismay, because they thought that I'd like lost my mind, and their son that was going to be a talented veterinarian is now going to be a personal trainer or wiping bin floors.
Especially, veterinarians are one of the most highest paid jobs in Australia, right?
Exactly. Like yeah. So they thought I lost my marbles a little bit, but I that's where I started my studies in sports science and exercise and health at UWA. Did really well and knocked out a double major degree in those within my first 3 years. Got offered a position to complete my honours degree in exercise physiology. That's when I really started honing in on nutrition. Like, when you start these studies, it's very broad in sort of the sports science and exercise science. You're doing a hell of a lot of stuff from anywhere from like hydration to sprinting to muscle gain to all sorts of things. So a massively mixed bag. But in exercise physiology, my honours degree, that's when I started that, okay, I think like nutrition could be my thing here that I'm going to dial in on. And then at the end of my honours degree, I did well with those exams and my thesis there. And the university was kind enough to offer me a scholarship position to complete a PhD. And my PhD that I selected was to be in clinical and sports nutrition, which led me to where I am now. So I'm 4th year into my PhD. And the topic of my PhD is novel strategies for enhancing body composition management in athletes. A lot of my research has focused on diet breaks and refeeds and a little bit of supplement stuff. So that is basically the rundown of what's got me here today.
Awesome.
Mate, I mean, look, I think it's, and everybody's got their different journey, in this industry. And I think, following your passion kind of rang through from that, because, obviously, especially, in Australian kind of, social, in a social environment, like being a veterinarian, like that's a big deal, these type of things. But, at the end of the day, if you're not happy doing it, why do it? Yeah. I think you're proof of that. So I think, like, some of the stuff that we want to dive into, we've already started diving into it, but like a lot of these vogue things that are out there in nutrition, lots of myths, lots of topics. Like, one of the ones that we constantly get, and I've actually started experimenting it with myself recently, just to kind of, I've always been a big believer in, it's one thing to read something, whether it's a program or a diet, there's another to apply it on yourself. And obviously everybody's biochemistry, the way they live, their work-life balance is going to influence that. But I'm a big believer, if you're going to go and talk to someone about something, go through the pages yourself. So talk to us about intermittent fasting. It's one thing in particular. There's a lot of big proponents of it out there at the moment, in terms of like, body composition, focus, energy, all these type of things. Give us your rundown on yay or nay, who it would be for, and some of the other pros or cons in relation to the topic of intermittent fasting.
Yeah. So my take is that intermittent fasting can absolutely help you get in shape, but it does so just like any other diet does, or any other weight loss protocol. It does so by creating calorie deficit. where intermittent fasting can be particularly effective, and I think this is where a lot of the hype has sort of originated from, is for people who aren't tracking their calorie intake daily. Because if you're just eating by feel or ad libitum, shortening your feeding window substantially can cause that food intake to decrease substantially. And a lot of the time, these people who haven't sort of practiced tracking calories or their daily intake before, they start intermittent fasting and they just start losing a bunch of weight. But they don't make the mental connection that it's just because they're consuming less calories in 24 hours. They make the assumption, oh, it's because I shortened my feeding window. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion and perhaps the sort of the mythical
hype
of fasting has sort of come from, is just truly not understanding what you actually changed. Now, there are some other benefits to intermittent fasting. For example, it can just make a certain calorie level easier to stick to for some people, especially for people who, and this is very common for people that just aren't hungry in the morning. A lot of even my clients they don't really want to eat first thing. They don't really, their hunger cues don't really start kicking into sort of 11:30 or something like that. But on the flip side, sort of when it comes to like nighttime, like post dinner, like all they want to do is ravage the fuck out of the pantry. So for those sort of people, it can make sense to sort of distributing a bunch of your daily calories in sort of that PM or that later feeding window, and not feeding yourself where you're not actually really that hungry. But it should, I think we do need to understand that intermittent fasting, it's not going to be, from a weight loss and fat loss perspective, if adherence is matched for both, it's going to be no more effective than an even spread of eating throughout the day. There's also some downsides to consider depending on your individual circumstances. For example, if you're training in the AM, intermittent fasting is just not a smart move for you. Like if you're training first thing and at 8 a.m. and you're planning on having your first meal at 11:30, it's quite likely that number one, your performance is going to be hampered somewhat, and number two, you're just not going to be maximizing the adaptations from that session. So they're probably my main takes on intermittent fasting.
I think, look, I second that. I mean, I've been doing it for about 3 weeks now, and I've been basically fasting for 18 hours a day. So from like 6 p.m. to 12 p.m, eating from 12 to 6. So I'm only having 2 meals. For me, I did it actually just more from a productivity standpoint. So, I mean, I've obviously had some weight gain because just through naturally doing it, like when after that initial adaptation period, if both my meals are about 1,000 to 1,200 calories, I'm automatically going into a deficit anyway. So for me, it's been more just from freeing more space up in my day to not do things, like to not eat. You don't realize, I think, at times, just like how much time you actually spend doing that.
Oh yeah.
But in saying that, like I've had to change around my whole schedule. I've gone from training in the morning to kind of like training late afternoon and things like that. So it's been an interesting experiment. But I'm looking forward to getting back into breakfast in the morning when I wake up on the weekend.
Jackson, another area where people are kind of talking a lot when it comes to fitness and nutrition is insulin sensitivity. It's almost like a buzzword or a thing that people love to blame when it comes to why they can't lose weight. I'm not insulin sensitive enough, or, I'm insulin resistant. Can you just explain to the listeners what is insulin sensitivity firstly, and why is it important?
Yeah. So insulin sensitivity is basically just how responsive the cells of our body are to the action of insulin. So if I say it in other terms, someone who is very insulin sensitive only needs a small amount of insulin to deposit sort of a given amount of glucose, whereas someone who's insulin resistant, they need a lot more insulin to deposit that same amount of glucose. Now, So the opposite of insulin sensitive is insulin resistant. And when this happens, you're basically not able to manage blood glucose levels effectively. And you're at a significantly increased risk of like these undesirable metabolic diseases, including, of course, diabetes, as well as cardiovascular disease. Now, the best way to improve insulin sensitivity, and people often don't like to hear this because they like to, like you said, they'll use insulin resistance as like sort of this get out of jail free card. It's like,
Yeah, that's right.
didn't make X progress because like insulin resistance.
Yeah.
But the best way to optimize insulin sensitivity, and you can ask, like my supervisor at UWA is actually a diabetes specialist.
Mhm.
So I've learned a lot of this stuff from him directly. The best way to improve insulin sensitivity is to reduce body weight and fat and to maintain a healthy body composition. Now, being insulin resistant does not mean you are inept from establishing a calorie deficit. It just does not mean that at all.
Yeah.
But yes, the key to sort of improving and maintaining insulin sensitivity, like the key factor is going to be reducing body fat and body weight. Now, there are some ways to improve insulin sensitivity independent of sort of body weight and fat loss, but they aren't as potent. And these are, of course, cardiovascular training and weight training. They've both been shown to be like relatively comparable at improving insulin sensitivity, even when weight loss isn't happening. And there are some supplements that can improve insulin sensitivity like very mildly. Things like resveratrol, even carnitine, prescription things like metformin. But what people need to understand, I feel like people get so confused, is like the insulin sensitivity benefits that you'll get from reducing like 5% of your body weight. Will be 10 to 20x as long as whatever insulin sensitizing benefits you're going to be getting from supplements or even just going to the gym if you're not losing body weight and body fat.
Question there, just because it came to mind and you actually brought up the compound, which is carnitine. So I've just kind of seen this circulating about people actually injecting L-carnitine, which is, it's not something that is very common necessarily, but in order to improve insulin sensitivity. Is that something you've heard about or know any research on?
Yeah, so it's basically just because the research has shown that sort of oral ingestion of carnitine just isn't that effective at increasing muscle carnitine stores, which is where we also need it. Like if we're taking it and it's just getting broken down and pissed out, well, what's the point?
It's similar, I guess, to like taking a B vitamin supplement or getting a B vitamin shot.
Correct. So all it is it's basically just a preferable form of sort of getting the carnitine into the spot where it can actually do something. But if people are going to go down the route of like, if they're 20% BF, and like I'm pushing insulin resistant here, like I'm going to go with some injectable carnitine. It's like, I think you've got your priorities like big out of whack.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think it comes down to like, that whole like, hierarchy of what's important. We've always, with our courses, like supplementation is like literally the last thing that is, like, it's literally it's stage 10.
Yeah.
And I think people try and overcomplicate the the weight loss or the fat loss or the body composition journey by trying to do all these fancy things. It's just like, like up your frequency of training sessions, decrease the amount of calories you consume, get some better sleep, don't be as stressed, and you'll get in shape.
That's not as sexy as taking a pill or injecting your carnitine before your cardio or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like approximately 62 seconds before you squat, you got to inject one in each quadricep. So I think like talking about different kind of methods out there, like the whole kind of flexible dieting thing. Obviously you spoke before about some of the research you were doing, and diet breaks. Obviously potentially being a tool that could psychologically help people improve their compliance. Talk to us about flexible dieting and in particular its application to kind of general population. What are your thoughts on that?
See, I think my perspective on flexible dieting is probably not the mainstream perspective. Like you'd know, Dane, like over the last maybe like 5 to 10 years when like flexible dieting sort of came onto the
Oh, yeah.
exploded in popularity, meal plans just got bashed the shit out of. And it's
Yep.
sort of to the point where like,
we
you're
do, you know, we,
meal plan, you're an idiot. You don't know science.
yeah.
So I'll touch on a couple of my thoughts. So if in terms of flexible dieting, if it allows you to maintain your desired calorie intake, then for sure it's going to work and it's going to deliver results. As most of the people who are watching this pod, I'm sure will know that the overall calorie intake, independent of
calories are king.
The exact foods consumed, is going to be the key to body weight and body composition management. But in terms of how effective do I think it is compared to like a rigid dieting approach or a meal plan approach, I think it's got to be very, very individual dependent. And we can't just say flexible dieting is better for everyone. For example, for some people, especially like serious athletes, they far prefer to be told just what to eat, go into robot mode.
100%.
And not have to waste like mental energy deciding what to eat each day, having to pull MyFitnessPal out and sort of log everything. But on the flip side, more so like the Gen Pop, you tell them that they have to eat the same thing every day and they think you've sort of ruined their life. They feel restricted and trapped and usually it results in cheating and binging. So flexible options can be quite effective for these people. So for the most part, it is going to come down to what suits you better. But for me, for example, when I'm in serious training phases, I'll follow a meal plan and eating would just basically become like clockwork. So I'm not spending time thinking about what I feel like and what would be super tasty, because if those things are super, super high on your priority ladder, progress probably just isn't that important to you either, which is fine. Like progress isn't that important to everyone. And so that's fine. But the point there is it comes down to the person and what they value. But I will say as a coach, like working as a coach, working with clients, when they are on a meal plan, geez, it's far easier than working with someone who is completely flexible. Now, with flexible dieting clients who are eating different foods at different times each day, your weigh-ins become more unpredictable based on how much fiber you're taking each day, sodium, the food volume you're consuming. And as a result of that, monitoring visual progress becomes even more difficult too. Now, these clients often run into digestive issues, but with different foods consumed each day, it's almost impossible to target the cause. And then finally, like we've got to think about performance as well, because performance becomes super unpredictable with flexible dieters, because like, let's think about it this way, like 50 grams of carbs in your pre-workout meal coming from Quest bars has a vastly different impact on performance than 50 grams of rice, 50 grams of carbs coming from rice. But we put that in MyFitnessPal, it's the same fucking number. It doesn't show you the difference.
Very different micronutrient profile, very different, glycemic load.
So calories are king, absolutely. Especially when we're talking about body composition management. But there's a lot of other considerations that sort of need to come into it, and I feel like a lot of people just aren't making those considerations at the moment.
I think what you've said there, it pretty much, I guess, echoes a lot of our sentiments. Like I think, especially 5-6 years ago, when it really, this whole flexible dieting thing and kind of. We actually developed when we had our gyms and we're doing personal training sessions, we actually developed our own nutrition software, which I should actually give you a free account to just to get your feedback on it, called iNutrition Pro. And basically it was a meal specific, calorie specific software that kind of went from taking the guesswork away for our clients to actually giving them specific things that they eat at each point in time, giving them the flexibility to, even pick the time that they want to eat it if that's what they want to do. Like, I think a lot of it comes down to the personality type of the client that you're dealing with, but then also the personality type of the coach. Like when I was coaching people, people would come to me not to stuff around. So it's like they would expect to be told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. They didn't want the El Vago approach. And that's like me too. Like if I'm dieting, flexible dieting is not fucking for me. I want to know what I'm eating, when I'm eating it, how much I'm eating of it, and how many fucking times a day I'm going to eat it. Because that's just how I process things. So I think it's for some people like us probably on this call, we're all a bit more specific, regimented. That's going to work for us. Maybe for someone that's just getting into training, that is like gone from eating like Maccas and stuff all day, like maybe that's what you start them on in month 1. And then once they adapt to that, but I agree, like it really is a case-by-case thing. And I think one of the things that flexible dieters always miss out on is the performance element too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it basically gets scaled with how important like optimization of progress is to you. For us guys on this call, I can tell that like that progress is damn important. So it's like, just we want to know what we have to eat to get the best results. And that's just basically as far as it goes. But for a lot of other people, it's the mindset's different. It's how can I get some results by making it not as hard or as easy as possible. And that's when sort of the flexible dieting becomes more applicable for some people.
I think also, just a final point on that, I think sometimes having the structure, especially when you start a program, can actually lead to a quicker level of results. Like if you're actually able to adhere to it. Obviously it depends on the mindset of the person, but if they're actually following something a bit more structured, they're going to get a bigger bang for their buck in terms of return on investment to start. And once they actually start seeing the fat come off them or the muscle build, they're going to be more likely to adhere rather than if they're kind of, being less specific.
I agree.
Yeah.
So similar to that, I guess, idea of flexible dieting and kind of saying to a client, look, you can have this if you really want it, if compliance is the key factor to them getting a result. Where do you reckon energy drinks sort of sit in that sort of equation when the goal of the client is achieving body composition?
See, like I'm not against energy drinks, like because when we're deciding to do anything in our physique pursuits, we've got to weigh up the costs and benefits. Now, as long as like we're talking about the diet version of energy drinks, there just isn't any reason to think that they're going to negatively impact our body composition efforts. And we have numerous studies to support that. And there's actually a number of studies that show they can actually sort of help weight loss and sort of physique efforts to a small degree. We know the caffeine has a mild appetite suppressing effect to help with hunger management. And sort of the caffeine can obviously give a little performance boost in the gym as well. We know that due to the carbonation, like in the drinks, they can actually have a notable satiety effect for like minimal calories. Now, like these are all benefits. We haven't sort of got to any costs yet. Now, a lot of people do sort of like to hammer on about like their poison, like you can have them, blah, blah, blah. And like you pull out a Monster, like I used to pull out Monsters at like university, and I'll just get daggers from people across the room. Like, why would you put that in your body? But if you really look at the research, properly and sort of don't just sort of read the abstract, it's quite easy to see that that a harmful intake of sort of artificial sweeteners, that's usually the problem that we usually talk about when it comes to energy drinks. And when we look at the harmful intake of artificial sweeteners, that just can't be achieved with a couple of cans of diet soda or diet energy drinks per day. Now, the studies that have shown harm with artificial sweeteners, they're almost always rodent studies. I haven't seen a harmful study on humans come out yet to date. And with these rodent studies, basically what they do is they load up the rats with these exorbitant doses of artificial sweeteners, usually in the range of like 50x what a human might consume with a couple of cans of diet soda. And you got to understand from a scientific perspective, this makes a lot of sense, because when you're doing a study and studies cost a shitload of money, you want to see an effect. So the best way to get an effect is to give them as much possible of the shit that you can give them to be able to see that effect. And yes, okay, we see some harmful effects with 50x, but it's the dose that makes the poison in this case. And there's
it's like anything though, if you load it up into the human body in surplus, you're going to get like, if all you ate was steak for 3,000 calories a day and that was all the calories that you ate, I'm sure if you did that for a year straight, probably some downstream issue.
100%. The perfect example is apples. So apples have cyanide in them. Now, you have enough cyanide, you're going to die on the spot. But when we have an apple, 2-3 apples a day, it's just no issue. You know what I mean? That's the way that I think a lot of people should look at artificial sweeteners. In the doses that humans are taking, even if we want to go up to like 3 cans a day, it's going to be nowhere in the range that sort of that has been quoted in these like harmful studies.
Interesting.
Well, talking then, I guess, about, energy drinks and things like that, like going into supplements. Talk to us a little bit about, obviously, supplements like branched chains, essential amino acids. Like, what supplements? Like, if someone was to say to you, Jackson, I've dialed in my training, I've dialed in my nutrition, I've dialed in my, my calories, my sleep, everything's kind of balanced out, and I'm really wanting to just get that next level edge. Like, what would be kind of 2 or 3 kind of maybe supplements that you feel have got good clinical evidence for working and helping, and that you would actually recommend?
Yeah. So you wouldn't be able to go past creatine as the first port of call. That is the single most well-researched supplement in the history of our time. There's just hundreds and hundreds of studies consistently showing positive performance, size, strength improvements occurring with supplementation. And like there's no other supplement out there that has a comparable volume of positive research as does creatine. So creatine is going to allow you to perform more frequent high intensity efforts for longer. So it doesn't matter if you're sprinting on the track, doesn't matter if you're pumping bench, like you're going to be able to maintain those high intensity efforts for longer, and you'll be able to do them more frequently.
So for the coaches out there that are listening, like what would be a client kind of profile and dosage range that they'd be looking at with creatine?
I give every single one of my clients creatine unless I'm working with someone who has to make weight. There is a water retention effect that happens inside the muscle cells. So, but I'll only ever drop it out before the weight making process. For every other client, like I'll have it in. There's research on older men, teenagers, females, overweight men, really lean men, consistently showing.
So it's your version of water for supplements. Yeah,
100%. Like if you're doing some form of exercise that is of a relatively high intensity, you'll be taking it if you work with me. And I'll go the standard 5 grams a day. I don't cycle it. It would just be a stalemate. Like I said, as long as you're like doing exercise that week, if you're doing exercise that week and you're working with me, you'll be taking creatine that week as well. So the good thing about creatine is it's not directly anabolic like some people might think. Like it's not just going to jack you up if you do nothing. But if you're able to do like high volumes of high intensity work, more sustained, more frequently, that's going to have an indirect improvement on your strength and your size progression. So that's why I really like creatine.
Just a side note for any of our listeners out there that like have supplement companies. I mean, Jackson, he'd be your perfect spokesperson because like I want to go into the cupboard and have some creatine now. It's funny though. It's like when you know things and then like it's kind of they go into the memory bank and you kind of just about it or don't do it, and then you hear someone or something trigger it. I'm like, fuck yeah, mate, that's like one thing I haven't dialed in recently, so I should probably look at it.
yeah, dial it in for sure, worth it. Next for me, for at least for I reckon 85% of people who just wouldn't be having sort of 4 or 5 serves of fatty fish in their diet each week would be fish oil. We actually, like, I was always a little bit of a skeptic on fish oil. I was never too amazed or things like that. But there was a really, really good systematic review that was published early this year. And I talked about it on my Instagram, which basically looked at the benefits of fish oil supplementation specifically to athletes. So people who are training. And they basically, it just, the benefits was a whole list with like notable studies showing benefits. Now, we saw improved levels of chronic inflammation, improved recovery, better mood, even better cardiovascular dynamics in athletes, which is surprisingly because they're supposed to have the best cardiovascular dynamics. So for the, like, if we're talking cost versus benefits, like minimal cost, and we're talking like 10 plus.
I think the reality is too, like, think about it, like the average person anyway is not having 4 to 5 servings of fatty fish per week.
No.
Like even when you say that, like that, I was just thinking like how many times in the last week I've eaten fish, and I make sure I eat well, probably about 4.
That's on the higher end too. That's on the
and I'm making a concerted effort. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So I think, like I said, 85% is probably close to 95% of people who aren't having the required amount of omega-3 coming from like fatty fish. It'd be crazy not to do fish oil. And like over the past few years, I've like been on and off with my fish oil because I was never super like blown away by the research. But once I read through this systematic review over like the past sort of 20 years of research, I was like, okay, like fish oil's not going anywhere.
What's the current recommended kind of dosages to get those side effects?
At least 2 grams of EPA and DHA combined. So that's not going to be 2 tabs like or 2 capsules. You're going to actually have to look on the back and see what's the actual EPA and DHA that's in there, because some of them are pretty crap, and a lot of people sometimes get confused and think it's like 1 gram per pill, and like that's not necessarily the case. The EPA and DHA can sometimes be far less than a gram per capsule. So I've got a really good one at the moment, and like I
think fish oil is one of those ones where it's like, if you're going to get it, like go with one of the more practitioner pharmaceutical grade ones that have, you know, got high quality, high dosage.
Yeah, like I've got a
whereas
high
creatine, it's more
I'm
like
taking sort of 5 tabs a day to get just over 2 grams of EPA and DHA.
Yep. Okay. Cool. And then what would be your
still going to be a shitload cheaper than like if you wanted to spend the same dose from salmon, like five.
And that's a good way to look at it, because a lot of people like think, oh fuck, like I need to go and spend this on supplements, but it's like cost benefit analysis. If you're going to get the same benefit from having 5 caps of a $60 bottle of fish oil that's going to last you 3 weeks, compared to having 5 meals that cost, you know, $25-$30 per meal, it's a lot cheaper at the end of the day.
Yeah. Totally.
What would be a third and final kind of a top 3?
This one probably might piss off a few people, but I'm a big caffeine fan. Like I've a lot of my
love caffeine.
A lot of my university research before I sort of got honed in on nutrition stuff was all about sports performance, right? And if we're talking about performance supplements, you'd be hard pressed to go past sort of caffeine. Like I feel like we live in this age where people want to take supplements where they think they can just take them and it would just like do their thing like 24 hours a day, and like that's sort of always acting. But I think more focus needs to go on to how can we sort of optimize what's happening in our sort of 1 hour training session a day or something. And caffeine is fantastic for that. So we know that from numerous research studies that caffeine will improve strength and endurance performance, notably. It can also help with training focus. It has notably increased mental clarity and things like that. So if you are truly like training, and I mean like training hard, then mental focus is going to be advantageous.
Oh yeah.
If you're training like a little bitch and you're on your phone, then like training focus is not going to be like that important to you, and you probably don't deserve to be taking caffeine anyway. But so a lot of good benefits from that front. It does have like a very mild fat loss effect. Increases sort of fatty acid oxidation, but I still wouldn't recommend it as a fat burner. Where I do think it really has its place is allowing you to perform high quality productive work in the gym at a higher intensity longer than you.
I think that's a very overlooked component of just people getting in shape, is that hour in the gym or 45 minutes or whatever it is. It's like, is it one that's interrupted on phone, or is it one where literally you are, you know, for me, like the gym it's always been like physical meditation. Yeah. So it's like you just get in the zone, you're pumping, you're doing, and focusing on that. I think it's a very underlooked, you know, component of people actually getting into shape. So anything you can do to support that is great.
I agree. My training session is probably the only time in my day where my phone's not close by, where I'll get like a full like hour and a half where I don't look at my phone once. So it's probably the only time in my day. So yeah, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. I agree with your list as well. I think those three supplements you mentioned are really, really important. I like the fact that you say that it's almost like you have to earn the right to have caffeine too. I think that's a big one. It's one of those things that you see everyone with the shakers walking around with pre-workout thinking they're a boss when they walk into the gym. So I thought that was a great point.
Chat to their buddies for 25 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Look, now we've spoken a lot about nutritional strategies. We're going to kind of talk about you a little bit. What does 2021 hold for you yourself when it comes to business and your brand? And are there any sort of exciting products that you have in the works that you can kind of let us in on?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me right now is wrapping up my PhD. Like obviously that's been a 4-year project in the work on the back of a 7-year university, 8-year university education. I do plan to complete that by the middle of this year. So that's going to be a massive weight lifted off the shoulders. So I'm very keen to sort of tick that box. I also I had one study published just the last couple of weeks ago, which we touched on at the start of the talk, but I've got another about 4 studies in the works. 3 are basically completed and one's almost completed. So they're going to also be published over the year. I'm very excited to get those out and talk about the findings with those, because obviously I do know the findings, and it's going to be very interesting for a lot of people, and it's no doubt going to stimulate a lot of discussion in our industry and teach our industry, which is cool. Outside of university study, I'm moving to Bali in the coming months, which is a fairly big change. Basically just because like PhD is finishing and our online work now is like sustainable financially. And I think Bali is just a good place for me to really grow and build my brand and be in the right sort of mindset to really do those things. Outside of that, I guess overall this year is me sort of just doubling down on my online educational content, particularly with YouTube. YouTube's a new thing for me. I only started it sort of last year, but it's starting to sort of gather some momentum now. People sort of like hanging for the next upload and things like that, which is cool. It feels like I got a channel now, you know, and like I just monetization like 2 weeks ago on YouTube. So like it's starting to sort of a few things starting to get going there.
YouTube, I think, is the one that will probably have one of the biggest growth curves for the fitness industry.
Yeah,
there's a lot of other industries, like from a if you want to talk about a business aspect, like people are making big money on that, bigger than Instagram and things like that too.
I love YouTube. I love the platform. I love the interactions with people that you can have on there, because like if someone's watching your YouTube, like my video is like 20 minutes, like that's a notable investment that someone's making, as opposed to like a quick scroll on IG. Like people are willing to sit down and focus and listen to you talk shit for 20 minutes. So I think that's also going to be the best place where I'm able to like share my knowledge, because like IG is cool. But
people don't use IG as a search engine. I think that's the big difference. People go onto YouTube, like my kids are watching YouTube every day, and even for me, at the end of every day, before I watch a show on TV or something like that, I'll go on YouTube and just kind of search for updates on things that might interest me.
Baby, subscribe to my channel, Dan.
I'm not yet, mate, but you know what? We're going to, Kim, make sure we get the company. I have watched some of your videos, just not as a subscriber. I was going to say, like, it's I think the way that you're putting the content out there is very digestible for the audience, and I think that's why I was touching base before on kind of some of your background in the anime, because I think a big point of difference for what you're putting out there, just being real and raw and knowledgeable. And I think in our industry, there's a lot of that lacking. So as someone who's been around for nearly 2 decades in the industry now, like it's a real breath of fresh air.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, thanks for your time, Jackson. We really appreciate you joining us today and giving.
It was a really good episode. Really good episode.
It was.
a lot of I think a lot of gems there for our students and audiences, and obviously, guys. Jackson, I'll give you the shameless plug now. For any of our listeners right now, where can they go to follow you, subscribe to you? Where do they go?
I just talked about how crap IG is, but the best place to still like get all my updates on, whether it's research, YouTube uploads, things I'm doing in the gym, my diet, like IG is still the best place to get there. And I build my sort of, I guess, my profile off IG. So I am still thankful for it. And I still do put educational content out, and the interactions we get in there is still really good. I was just sort of saying YouTube's preferable because I think Instagram followers, they like the tits and the ass and the abs a little bit better. And like
YouTube's more long form. Like if you're serious about like wanting to learn, I think that's your medium.
Yeah. So my Instagram handle is just at Jackson Peos. And then, like we said, my YouTube channel is where I'm really sort of diverting a lot of my focus for the next 12 months. So I talk about research, talk about the ins and outs of my diet, my training, whatever other cool things are going on in my life. And that's just at Jackson Peos as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jackson.
No, it was a really fun chat.